Welcome to Three Skulls Tavern, a channel devoted to tabletop role-playing games by Free League Publishing. This show is sponsored by WorldMill, online server hosting for the Foundry Virtual Tabletop. To support the show, head over to patreon.com/Matt K. For a minimum of $2 per month, you get access to a ton of extra content. Hello, and welcome back to another interview here on Three Skulls Tavern. I'm your host, Matt, and today I'm going to be talking with Tim Korklewski from Firelock Games about the upcoming historical pirate game Under the Black Sail. I was going to say flag for a second. Under the Black Sail, which I'm very excited about. I lived in Bristol, England for a very long time, which is, they like to say it's like the home of piracy. Because that's where Blackbeard came from, and been like a lot of people just love the pirate genre. So I was very excited to when I first heard that there was a pirate game coming out. I very quickly went over to the Facebook page, which is where all the action's happening, to find out if this was going to be another sort of like Tim Powers type of deal with a bit of supernatural, and was very happy to find out that it was going to be a historical game. So I'm going to stop talking about it. I'm going to bring Tim on board here to tell you all about it himself as we do an interview for this game. So let me just switch our feeds over and bring your audio online. There we go. So Tim, hi. Thanks for joining me tonight. Or today, in your case.
Yeah, well, hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me on. I've been looking forward to this for a few weeks since you reached out to me.
Yeah, awesome. So I guess before we start talking about the game a little bit, why don't we do a little bit of an intro of you yourself? Like, what's your kind of how do you want to say it? Like your gaming pedigree. Like, how did you get into gaming, especially role playing games, and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so let's go the way back machine. So for those of you listening, I am 39 years old. For some people, that would be considered a grognard, so I'll totally take that one. So for me, gaming-wise, like if we're going to go back that far, I actually started with D&D 2nd edition back when I was just starting the 8th grade, and absolutely fell in love with it. Always loved the idea. I dabbled, my 7th grade year. A couple friends turned me on to BattleTech and a couple things like that. And it wasn't until I played AD&D 2nd edition that I was like, whoa, there's so much more to the concept of gaming outside of like just roll dice, pass, fail, did you do it, yes, no.
Yeah.
Not to like make things sound less than when you're playing games that are like board games or whatnot, right? But like role playing, there's so much more behind that. Like there's the actual role playing aspect and the problem solving that doesn't always just involve rolling dice and things of that nature that I really fell in love with. I kept up with it for a good chunk of time up through high school, into college. I took a bit of a break when I was kind of getting early 20s, kind of started into career and things like that. And I decided probably early 30 years old that I was going to get back into it on more of a professional level. And I've always been heavy on game design. I've always designed a lot of things in the past. Not everything has ever been made out to publish. Like there was a lot of stuff I took to friends. I'm like, hey guys, what do you think of this? And they shut it down immediately with some very not nice words. We'll keep it family friendly for the podcast. But yeah, so like not every design has always been the hottest. And it wasn't until I started kind of going back to conventions, like as my time kind of freed up, going back to conventions and talking with companies, and kind of work at the booths and just getting to know the owners of companies, getting to know the designers and things like that. And I guess you want to say just having the courage to go forward and mention to them that I like to do these sorts of things and that I've got these particular sets of skills, that they started to really look at me on a much more serious light, if you want to call it that. So 2014 was my I was doing a lot of like contract work and like convention work and things like that, and like side sales and marketing for different companies. It wasn't until 2014 when I signed on full time with Cool Mini or Not, as they were known as the time. Then CMON, and as a lot of people now know as Come On, as part of it underneath the Osmode umbrella, was really when I started getting into the game industry as a whole full time. So I mean, even today, like, yes, I still do game design. Yes, I still do a lot of these things, but there's so much, just kind of give you a bit of behind the scenes. There's so much more that goes on in the industry outside of the game design that has to take place. So like primarily what I do is sales and marketing, and a lot of the game design happens kind of during the day, part-time, when I can get it in and get all that going. And with that, I have worked on lots of different games. So Xenoshift, Onslaught, I've worked on the original Rub and Bones that came out from Cool Mini or Not. I was helping a lot with the play test on that, so I'm not going to claim any development credits. It was more along the lines of we had really, really good in-house developers and designers, and I basically was sent in there along with a few other people to, like, we were basically given the rules and said, okay, break it.
Yeah.
Like, okay, fair enough. That's what we're going to do. And so, I've done a lot with the Dark Age miniatures game, Wrath of Kings. I did some very, 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 very early work on the Song of Ice and Fire miniatures game before it came out into the iteration that it is now. And to give you an idea of how early, I actually don't recognize a lot of what came out in the miniatures game when it came out, like outside of like I knew that it was being worked on. So there's a lot of obviously rules and change and development, things like that happen along the way. And that's very commonplace in the industry. Like where things start are almost never where they end up, almost never. So, and I worked with Cool Mini or Not for quite some time. I went and worked for a consultation company called Publisher Services Inc., known as PSI, where I worked under, I had almost 200 vendors under my belt at one time that were in the industry. So between role-playing games, I was very close friends still to this day with the whole cast and crew over at Cubicle 7. TS, if you're listening, hey man, been a while. But I definitely did a lot with them. So a lot of the stuff for Warhammer Fantasy, I helped work on that and kind of get some of that going. So Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition.
Yeah.
Obviously, I was not in any way like the lead on that by any stretch of the imagination. The new Wrath and Glory, a lot of the new stuff that's coming out for the Age of Sigmar Soulbound. So I've been in on a lot of projects.
Yeah.
And I've also done a lot of my own independent designs as well. So I actually released 3 books through Osprey called Ragnarok Heavy Metal Combat in the Viking Age. And I've got a whole bunch of other stuff right now that I'm working on in the background outside of Under the Black Sail. So once this project is done, as much as I'm going to pat myself on the back and be ready for it to go live and sale and be able to promote it and everything else, and we'd be like, all right, great, on to the next project, because I got a lot more lined up. So, I mean, needless to say, I've been, I guess it's a very long-winded way of saying it, I've been doing it for quite some time on, various capacities and levels. This is probably my biggest endeavor, just because of the fact that outside of the historian input, this has been a monstrous solo project. Matt, I know you got a chance to look at the document. Right now it's at about 277 pages, pure text. There's no artwork, nothing of this sort in there. And I'm still adding in more. I've probably got another 30 or 40 pages that will be added in before it's complete. And then it's off to editing, layout, design, graphics, getting artwork implanted, and all that good stuff. So, it's definitely, it's going to be a monstrous book when it's all said and done. Right now, we're kind of leaning towards the fact it's probably going to be obviously hardbound, but it's probably going to be about 340-ish pages.
Okay. And format-wise, that's going to be like letter format as well? Yeah.
Letter format, yeah. So
it's not digest or anything like that. Yeah.
No, not digest. So this is very similar to like the textbook size for those of you that are watching, like for the Americans, the 8.5 by 11.
This channel covers we pretty much exclusively talk about cover Year Zero Engine games, and all of the Year Zero Engine games other than Forbidden Lands are in letter format, so it'll fit nicely on the shelf next to the other Year Zero titles. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, it will.
Cool. All right. Very interesting. I'm very familiar with Wolfrup and Wrath and Glory and Age of Sigmar Soulbound. I've played all of them. I'm actually in a second season of a big campaign of Wolfrup. I'm a huge fan. So
fantastic!
That's pretty
fantastic.
Cool. But yeah, very cool. Thanks for giving us a bit of your history there. Now, can you tell us a little bit about give us the pitch for Under the Black Sail? Obviously, I've read the manuscript, so I know all about it. But for obviously the people who haven't might not be aware of it, what's the game all about?
Yeah, so it is a historically accurate game on piracy, right? It is a role-playing game based upon piracy, focusing mostly in the New World. So like as America is being colonized and South America is being colonized, it's focused primarily in that area. It doesn't mean that you can't set it in other areas because the technology levels were the same. But as far as a lot of the writing that we're doing for the book, it is based solely in that
it's
region.
17th century kind of golden age of sail sort of.
Yeah, so it's going to go from the early piracy up to late piracy to the end where England was kind of like, we've had enough of your crap. We're rolling in with first-rate ships in the line, and your sloops are going to go bye-bye really fast. So so there, I know that a lot of people are more familiar with the later era piracy, especially when the Republic of Pirates was formed. So they're used to more of the Robert Hornigold, the Blackbeard, Black Caesar, Charles Vane, Mary Read, Anne Bonny, Calico Jack Rackham. So a lot of those pirates are going to be in there. That is actually later era piracy. Henry Morgan, believe it or not, is actually early era piracy, and we're also going to be covering a lot of the pirates from that period too. So, legendary figures such as Mombar the Exterminator to this day, like even the historical documents that we have, we believe that was a name that was almost passed on, very similar to like the Dread Pirate Roberts. For those of you that are familiar with the Princess Bride, like we know that Mombar the Exterminator existed. We don't know much outside of that, right? Like he's a very interesting figure that's kind of steeped in mystery, and it is believed that there was multiple Mombar at one point. So we're covering him. One of what I like to coin as one of the original American psychos, John David Now, also known as Francois L'Ollonais. Absolute psychopath of a man that sailed under the French flag. So we're going to be covering a lot of like him as well as like Manuel Riviere de Podal, John Morris, obviously Henry Morgan. His uncle will actually get some time on page for a little bit, also dealing with the history that he literally ran off a boat, overheated, and died of heat stroke. But so we're going to be covering early piracy all the way up until basically before England rolled in and said, we've had enough of this and you're done. So it's going to cover everything in between. So like one of the biggest wars that happened in that time is Queen Anne's War, and so that's actually going to be part of what's incorporated into the book as well. So we are working with a lot of historians to make sure that the actual accuracy of the history we're putting in there is correct. We didn't when we started this. We really did not want to touch on just the romanticism of piracy. We wanted to make it the real history of what happened. And for those of you that are not familiar, Firelock Games, actually their first game that they ever created was called Blood and Plunder, which was a historical piracy game that was a miniatures war game. So the whole concept of Under the Black Sail actually happened as kind of an internal fan service, for lack of better terms, to a lot of the existing player base of the war game. There's a lot of people that are like, man, we really wish this was an RPG. And after hearing that since mid 2016, we decided to finally say, you know what, to heck with it. 2018, we started working on the role-playing game, and it's been kind of working on it systemically ever since. And we've had a lot of people really excited about it. We've had a lot of people that are really into the history of piracy, really happy with us about the fact that like we are touching on the real ugly truth of piracy, and kind of getting rid of some of that like Hollywood romanticism. So that's a lot of what's going to be kind of covered in the book. So part of that as well, just to kind of put it out there for people, if obviously we're all well aware of the fact that most people back then were genuinely awful people. So we do have sections of the book that talk about some nasty things that happened during the period, be it slavery and things like that. And what you decide to put into your game is entirely based on you and what your group can handle. We include those subjects in there because it is part of the history, right? So like we really wanted this to almost feel like a textbook with game rules put into it, right? So that does not, like one thing we've definitely stated many times, and I'll state it again, this does not give people agency to run roughshod over their player base and make them, play through things that they don't want to. We actually talk about that quite a bit in the book, that you need to touch upon the subject matter in the book as you see fit and what your group is comfortable with. So, anything that's included in there when it comes time to some of the more heinous things of that time period is just there strictly for historic completion, right? It's really what it's for. So we touch upon a lot of like the viewpoints that Spain has over England, has over France, has over the Dutch. And so there's a lot of that that's kind of woven in there, like how the South American natives kind of came into some of the conflicts and how they were treated, and like how some of them were Christianized, some of them were not, how the different nationalities treated them, how they like which ones saw them as allies, which ones them tried to exploit them, things of that nature. And just also touching upon a lot of like what happened as the New World was being colonized as well, because it wasn't always just everybody was out on a ship going yar, sailing around under a black flag and shooting cannons at one another. As a matter of fact, most piracy that happened during the time did not even turn into bloody conflicts. They would just roll up on another ship and go, hey, we've got more guns, we've got more guys with guns, we're not afraid to use them, give us your stuff, you can walk away without any injuries. Right, or join us. And so that, we touch upon that in the book, that it's like a lot of how piracy happened was more shock and awe, right? So very similar to like when we see in movies like the bank robbery where they walk in there with all the guns and they go, all right, down to the ground, like as long as you don't do anything crazy, nobody gets hurt, they get all the money and they leave, right? That was pretty much how pirates acted, right? And privateers when they were sailing under letters of marque. So, there's obviously lots of different rules of engagement in between that we talk about as well, and like how things were handled. Believe it or not, during the time, there were not that many real, as we think of it, pirates on that level. It wasn't until the later time periods that they actually just started labeling them all pirate, because it was more of a political reason to say we're done with this.
Okay. Yeah.
So, so I mean, lots and lots of stuff to cover. I babbled on quite a bit there, but Matt, I'm sure you got a couple more questions for me. But
I've got lots
hopefully
of questions.
that kind of touches upon like what the book is going to cover.
And I can say very much that, like, having looked through the manuscript, there is a huge section, like nearly 50 pages at the beginning, or near the beginning, with a timeline of the period starting from the early 1600s to the 1700s, like the mid 1700s. And then the kind of like bestiary at the back of the book, where you've got all the stats for where you'd expect to find stats for NPCs and all the rest of it, is a huge section as well that delves into, it's like sorted. I don't know if it's going to change, obviously, but from what I've seen, I was quite happy with it, because it seems quite easy to reference as well, where you've split all of the various character factions, whatever, by factions, or even by nationality to start off with. So you've got like the English, the English and what they were doing, the Spanish and the French and the Dutch, and then all the other groups that came into play as well. That was very interesting to kind of go through that. And looking at the Native American section, there was, as you say, there was a lot of there was some Mayan, native Central American characters that kind of were around during that time, which I never knew anything about, because we very much get a very kind of one-sided view of piracy from where, I mean, I'm kind of generalizing a bit, but for people who are kind of like the layperson, it's really what we're fed in media. So anyway, that's a really interesting discussion that we can probably go down a real rabbit hole on. But let's get into the nitty-gritty of the game a bit. Before I jump into that, just one quick question. Is this going to be like a standard sort of, eventually it'll go up for pre-order, or are you planning to do some sort of like a Kickstarter or crowdfunding thing for it?
So we've gone back and forth on that. As much as I'll just say yes to both. So right now we're trying to factor in like where it's going to fall. Right now, because of the fact that we are planning on doing like a collector's box set with custom dice and maps, and it'll have the full rule book in there along with a game master screen, we are thinking more along the lines of a Kickstarter. Yeah. Just to make that a little bit easier to get that going, right? And not only that, Kickstarter is a great advertising platform for a lot of those, and so many are used to using it at this point that, we definitely, there's advantages to both sides, right? The other side of it is we do have enough of a fan base that if we were to just put it out for pre-order, it would still do okay on its own. Yeah. I can see that for like a collector's edition for sure. Like you can see what the demand is for that, rather than making 100 and only selling 20. Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
So, we've gone back and forth. So from a more business perspective, the answer on that is a resounding yes. We're just not sure which one we're going with yet.
Okay. It'll be a pre-order platform of some description.
Yes, it will be a pre-order platform. Yes, exactly.
Okay, cool. All right, let's jump into the themes of the game then.
Yeah.
And like one of the things I kind of, it might sound a bit like a bit of a trite question, but what do players actually do in the game? They're going to be, there's an assumption that they're under the black sail, so that they are pirates of some description. But what are players actually doing in the game?
So as far as that goes, we leave a lot of that up to the game master themselves. So one of the cool things that we've always done, even with Blood and Plunder, that we're kind of getting that point across in the book without like hitting people on the head with it, is it is a New World colonial game with the veneer of a pirate game, right? So like obviously piracy back then was a very big factor of how the New World was formed, especially when the different factions that were fighting. But there's absolutely nothing stopping people from playing as I'm a member of the local militia force, and somebody has rolled up into my village and has started sacking it, and I no longer want that to be an issue, right? So like you could either play as, the quote unquote pirates, or you could play as somebody who's defending against a group of pirates that are trying to sack your hometown, right? So it's entirely up to the game master and the group of the kind of game that they want to run.
Okay.
Kind of going into the subject matter I mentioned before, where you're allowed to kind of develop what you want on top of that and what themes you're willing to go with, right? So we provided more than enough in there for people to be able to run like more about, if they want to run more of a land-based game, or if they want to be just like on boats the whole time doing, generic pirate stuff, they could do it either way they want to, and they can actually cross those streams seamlessly. It's a matter of where the game master wants to take the game and what the players want to see. So with character creation, for example, in the game, just like any other game out there, right? Like when we're talking a role-playing game, you want it to be a collaborative experience. You don't want to be the guy that makes like someone who can't swim, has never seen the water, has lived in the mountains, and is suddenly a pirate on a boat, right? Like you don't want to be that guy unless it's like something cool that you want to do in the story. But one of the things that we really touch upon in the game, right, is that you don't get archetypes like you're used to seeing in a lot of the other Year Zero Engine games. You actually have two backgrounds, so it's kind of like your youth and early childhood, and then like your young adulthood, and then that kind of cuts off to be like, okay, great, these are my focused attributes, my focus skills, and a couple of talents that I can choose from, and that has helped me determine who I am now. Like that's who I am right now, and anything that happens past this is entirely of my doing.
Yeah.
Right. So if you were born near the sea, you might actually have a background where you were a sailor. You might have been a member of the English Navy before this point when you start playing the character. So yeah, you might already have like some focused skills in sailing, right? Or you could have been at one point when you were younger an orphan, and that will also give you certain skills such as stealth and scheme and things like that, because you had to like learn how to live on your own and kind of build yourself and pull yourself up out of that. So that's there's a lot of things that help build your character to who they are now. Yeah.
Now, something I was quite drawn to, actually. I quite like classless role-playing games, and that jumped out because it's although the Year Zero engine does have sort of roles or whatever, they're always called something different in the various games. They are relatively open-ended, where it kind of gives you an archetype that you start with, and then it's kind of open-ended once your character creation is finished. But here, there's not even an archetype, as you say. It's just two backgrounds, and I really like that. I really like that approach. So yeah, I was quite. I think I was expecting to see something a little bit more like we tend to see in the Year Zero engine, and I was kind of wondering about what are the roles going to look like for a sort of piracy-based game. Is someone playing? I don't know, like. Yeah, it just kind of gets a bit murky. Like, well, what are the roles going to be? They're going to be that different. So, yeah, very cool approach to have the backgrounds. I think it's really cool. So, kind of jumping into the mechanics a bit. In fact, before I jump into, you kind of went to my first question for the mechanics, which is about the background. But I wanted to talk a little bit more about the kind of themes of the game. And one of the things that kind of kind of came across in the manuscript was that it looked like it was kind of made for what I would consider to be slightly bigger, like table sizes. What would be the ideal sort of group size to play this game?
So with that, it's actually, you can play it as few or as many people as you want. With, again, like it's any other role-playing game, with what the GM feels comfortable handling. Me personally, I will never go beyond a group of 5, right? Like I don't ever want to have a point at the table to where somebody's like, well, my turn's done, and now they're, on their phone doing this, waiting for their next turn to come back around. So so I actively try to avoid it. Again, we kind of leave that up to the game master. But one of the things that we did, just because of the fact that this is a game that's rooted in reality, right? Part of that is that not everybody can be good at everything. And one of the ways that we kind of handle that in game is the use of crew, right? So the way that crew works is that after you create your individual character, there's kind of a, you can do this during session 0, done via email, different things of that nature. But one of the next steps is that you actually create your crew, which are like starting support cast and NPCs that your characters all know in some way, shape, or form. So either they work with them directly as part of like the local militia, or, they're part of the crew of the ship, or, they just happen to be really good contacts in a town that they know. Your crew is basically like a free range NPC that can jump in and assist the characters in a lot of different ways outside of like, oh, we'll make a roll. Did you persuade them? Yay. Okay, great. 2 thumbs up. Keep moving. Right. So the other side with the crew is that there's going to be the situations where your primary character may end up out of action, either by choice or, injury or something along those lines. So a good example of this, let's say that you decide to make like some Dutch Z-lead and boards ships and brawls and drinks himself into an oblivion when he's not fighting, like you kind of make that typical rough and tumble, pirate type of archetype, right? And then you find out that you're about to do something where you're dealing with the governor of North Carolina, right? And you're like, well, my character is going to cause a lot of issues. So instead of the character, again, or the player sitting there and just being on their phone the whole time waiting for it's like, okay, that's great. When do I get into a fight? They can actually take over as one of the crew that might be better in that situation. Be it like, you might have a priest, or you might actually have like a noble or a diplomat that, again, your crew knows. And so you take over as that crew member to be in that particular scene, right? So the whole idea of the crew is that, one, it creates alternative characters for people to kind of jump in and play when their primary character just may not be good in that scene, right? Like, just like in real life, if you run into if somebody's got that friend that's like always drinking and getting into bar brawls, that's not the person that you're taking to, your Christmas dinner, right? So like, he's going to sit at home and do his thing, and you're going to invite somebody else, right? So that's really kind of where that whole idea comes from with the crew. And its primary use is that the crew is there to help assist the players and act as alternative characters, so the players themselves never feel like they're out of a scene or a game.
Yeah, that's cool.
So
that kind of troop play is pretty cool, I think. And part of that as well, there's a big section at the beginning tied in with crew creation, which also talks about Stronghold and creating your Stronghold.
Yes.
So can you tell us a little bit about the kind of how the Strongholds are going to work?
Yeah, so Stronghold is a very catch-all term.
Yeah.
So a Stronghold could be anything from an actual stronghold where it's a fortified brick, coastal, gun battery, all the way to a booby trap bungalow in the middle of the jungle. It could be a bar that you're part owner of in Nassau that has a reinforced basement where illicit things happen and pass back and forth. It could be your ship. It could be whatever it is that you want. So the Stronghold is just, it's a catch-all term for basically your base of operations of whatever that looks like, right? And so that's also a collaborative part of the creation process that actually happens right after the crew. So you make your primary character, then you work with the other players to make your crew, and then you work with the players to make your Stronghold, right? And your game master at this point, if they already have an idea of like, look, this is going to be very much a swashbuckling piracy, we're all straight pirates, then your Stronghold at this point you pretty much know is going to be some form of a ship, right? And based upon different things that, you know, your game master might actually give you extra, but there's also calculated ways that you get to the point of like, here's how many points we have to spend on our stronghold, right? So I actually break down in the book like how strongholds are made, the size of each room, how many crew, like how many people can be in a certain size of each room. I did it in a very vague is probably the wrong term to use, but I did it in a way that leaves it open-ended enough that it makes it easy for the game master to run without needing 8 million charts in order to do so, right? Like your stronghold should never feel like a quote unquote dungeon map if you're playing a typical dungeon crawl RPG, right? It should feel very much like, okay, well, here's the hull, here's the, you know, here's the aft deck, here's the foredeck, here's the captain's quarters. Done. We know how many cannons are in each section, how many people need to, you know, man the cannons in order to fire them, and how much can fit within these sections, right? Either be it people or stuff or a combination. And it allows it to be much easier to be used in those ways. So the other side too, with the stronghold and character creation, doesn't just have to be one. So if you decide that you want to have, you know, like let's say you're all playing South American natives and you have like a network of like small jungle safe houses that you have where it's kind of like you're going out and just doing guerrilla warfare versus the Spanish, right? You got like these little booby-trapped, you know, jungle bungalows to come back to in order to kind of, you know, regroup and, you know, defend yourself if necessary, if things just went awry. So there's a lot of different ways that strongholds can be used, right? But the primary feeling of a stronghold is that it's your base of operations. So you and the other players really have the most agency over it, right? So it's the difference between a house and a home kind of feel, right? Where it's like, we've seen this in a lot of other role-playing games where it's like you're out traveling a lot. It's like you have a home somewhere, but you never go to it, right? So we've seen that a lot in other role-playing games where it's like the stronghold should feel like a place that after every major excursion, you're either with it or going back to it or really wishing you could get back to it.
Yeah.
If that, you know, hopefully that kind of makes sense. So, and then, you know, there's nothing stopping you from getting other strongholds through legal or illegal means.
Okay. Yeah, cool.
So,
all right.
Yeah. So that's ultimately the use of strongholds, right? Is it gives the players more of a base of operations that they can control.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, we're familiar with it from, well, I'm at least from Forbidden Lands.
There's a good example.
Yeah. So yeah, but that's cool that it's kind of open-ended like that. I did notice, I wasn't sure if that was part of it being kind of still in the kind of manuscript for kind of stage, that like it seemed more open-ended than what I'm familiar with. Like there wasn't a big list of like upgrades, because you can't really have a big list of upgrades for something that could be anything really.
Yeah, and that's the hard part, right? Is you're trying to balance from a game design perspective the ability to get the point across without needing 8,000 charts and making your game master have a headache every game.
Yeah. No, I understand that. Yeah, definitely. I guess the one thing you kind of touched on there, which will probably be of interest to quite a few people, is will we be seeing some like cross-section maps of ships, different size ships?
Yes.
Okay.
So that is all being worked on now. So it is not in the manuscript that you have. So you know, just to kind of touch upon how I design things and develop things, what you're getting in the manuscript is pretty much like, as I put it in there, that's how I expect the book to kind of be laid out. So there's actually big sections of the book that you haven't seen yet. Part of that is actually working with the historians about like, you know, what exactly is a brigantine, right? And then breaking down in there, like, typically there's this many guns on the fore, this many guns on the aft, you know, do they have bow chasers? You know, what kind of different things are the ships capable of? What were they primarily used for? And, you know, typically how many crew do they take to run? Which we touch upon a lot of that kind of in the stronghold section of the book about like, you know, what it takes in order to keep a stronghold up and operational.
Yeah.
You know, and so we talk about like, that's all being written up. And then part of that too is also just like the straight gameplay statistic examples of what they would look like if you were to build, say, a brigantine. What would a brigantine look like, right? So it kind of gives an idea of like the size of the stronghold. You know, so if you want to purchase one of these for yourselves later, or you happen to acquire one again through legal or illegal means, how big are they going to be? how much crew do you need to man it, typically like how many supplies do you need, which we try to keep all that pretty open-ended and not as bookkeepy.
Yeah.
But there's still that cost benefit analysis of like, okay, if we're stretched really thin, maybe we got to dock a ship for a while. So there's lots of different things like that we take into consideration with that. So yes, there is a section of that's being worked on that's not in the manuscript you have, just like the other two big sections that have not been incorporated yet, because I haven't decided what section of the book I want to put them in, is the use of strongholds and like stronghold combat, be it like ship to ship or ship versus a fortress, or like on foot versus the fortress, whatever that may look like. And then of course, mass battle, which is a big thing that a lot of RPGs have a tendency to struggle with. That's also going to be, again, depending upon what the game master is looking to do with their vision of how the game's going to go, could very well happen or not, depending upon how they're going to operate things.
Okay.
So a lot of those skills that you see in there, like warfare, and like it's kind of listed by type, like land-based, naval. That's where those really start coming in, as skills that really start kind of stacking up. So there's a lot of those sections are going to be put into the book. It's just I've written them out. There's a little bit more cleanup that has to be done, a little bit more playtest that's got to be done. And then it's just, do I put this in the game master section or do I put this in the core rules? I haven't decided yet. So that's really why like that's not in the book as you see it now. I kind of write some stuff off to the side and then tuck it in as I kind of see where it's going to go.
Okay.
A lot of that also is the equipment. You notice that I do have a very kind of like sparse kind of like equipment chart in there, but there's not a lot that's spelled out. I'm working on a lot of that now, making sure that historically it's all being represented properly. There's actually a couple pieces that are in there that we are leaving for the sake of completion, but they're exceedingly rare pieces to find on this half of the world at that time period.
Okay.
Right. So like good example of that, there's still armor, but like if anybody over in the New World has a full set of half plate armor at that point, they are probably some nephew of some noble that is just some pretentious idiot that doesn't understand how the New World works. Right. So like, it doesn't mean that you can't run into somebody who's tanking up on you in full armor, but most people are going to look and be like, who is this idiot? Does he know how hot it is? So, we did include some of that stuff in there as like exceedingly rare, extreme corner cases, because we have found that there has been proof of those things existing here. It's just at that point, it's like they're so rare that running into it is almost going to be like a unicorn.
Yeah. For sure.
So, so a lot of that's being detailed out in there as well. I'm sure you saw the section that kind of talks about like how the pieces of 8 and how that all translates into balloons and things of that nature. So there's a lot of really cool historical references that we're putting into the book. That's there again for more of an education purpose. On the game side of it, we do make it much easier for you to play.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. I want to divert slightly away from the kind of the deep dive into the mechanics, which is the next thing I want to talk about. Just because you've touched on some things there that touch on another question I had later on my list. And that was kind of like, what would a typical campaign look like? And I know we've already talked a little bit about this when we were talking about what would players do, and then it's up to the GMs. But is there going to be sort of like a starting adventure or an official campaign potentially coming, like that you're going to be working on for it? Anything along those lines?
Yes. So we do have a couple of things that are in the works right now. So the intro adventure that we're working on is called the Oro Savalle, which is, Spanish translation of the Savage Gold, right? So this is gold that they've been taking from like the Dairen and the Cunha and the Kalinago people, right? And of course, back then, like, is that title slightly offensive? Yes. However, it's, historically accurate, right? Like a lot of people looked at the natives and said they're not Christian, therefore they're still kind of barbaric and savage and things of that nature. So there's some of that treatment is kind of in there. So the title kind of reflects upon the fact that it's like, okay, like we're dealing with like a historical piece, right? This isn't an Errol Flynn movie. But the premise of that adventure is it's going to give the players some problem solving, some social interaction, some combat, and depending upon how awry things go, there might be some ship-to-ship combat in there as well. So the whole idea of that intro adventure, which should really only take, if you're playing it, on a typical 4-hour game, it should take maybe 1 to 2 sessions to get through that initial push. And then it does lead into some of the bullet points that you mentioned in that 50 plus pages in the beginning of the book that has all those bullet points. And the cool thing with those bullet points that we actually did, if you really take a look at them, those are all plot hooks that you could use throughout a campaign that actually weave themselves throughout the story. Right. So you look at like a lot of the Spanish flotilla and like the different things that they did is they were like taking goods from the New World back to Spain. Like there's a lot of people that chased down the various armadas that were part of the Spanish flotilla. So like you could be part of either the Spanish flotilla force or you could be the people that are chasing them down. And we reference a lot of those in there. This adventure kind of springboards off of that idea that, you know, that the savage gold that you have found that you've taken from a Spanish ship is part of a larger flotilla, right? So, you know, without giving too much of the story away, because it is an intro adventure, I don't want to give too much away. It will lead to more of a wider campaign.
Okay.
Right. So you could either use it as your own jump off point. Like you could use it as a one shot just to get people into the core rules of how the game works. You can use it as a jumping point for your own campaign, and they might, you know, veer completely left compared to where, you know, I use heavy quotations here, intention goes. But, you know, if you wanted to take it that next natural progression, it could be that, yes, you are actually becoming hunters looking for the Spanish flotilla, right? Like you're going after the bigger ships in order to get more of the plunder.
Yeah.
So, you know, there is a natural progression that comes off of that initial adventure. You know, I'm trying to be as vague as possible about it, but like there's many different things that can happen within that adventure that you can take in many different ways.
Okay.
And then one of the things that we talked about that we have been kind of working on a little bit in the background right now, and again, small company, like I can't say that we're like fully in development on a lot of these things because we don't have that kind of bandwidth, is actually some different campaigns that are dealing with, you know, different historical figureheads. So that's one of the things that we've definitely been kind of working on too, where, you know, longer campaigns and also kind of micro campaigns that might be like 6 or 7 sessions. That might be like the life and times of John Morris, for example, and how much of a dirtbag he was. So, you know, there's different things like that we're kind of touching upon within those. And, you know, we do plan on releasing some published, you know, campaigns that go along with it that, you know, ideally, if you're sticking to a certain time period, you may be able to weave them into your story in different ways, or just play them straight from book as you want to play them.
Okay. Yeah.
You know, yeah. So the big part that we also touch upon is the fact that, like, and this is always a hard part when you're writing historical RPG, because a lot of people look at it and go, well, why would I want to play a historical RPG? We already know how it ends. Right. And it's like, that's very true. But like in your game, if you walk up to Henry Morgan, shoot him dead in the face and he dies. Well, in your historical world, Henry Morgan no longer exists. So now it's up to you to figure out, what does that look like?
Yeah.
Like, what kind of a power vacuum did you just leave in, like, later in Jamaica when he would have become governor, right? Like, so what does that look like? So, you know, and that's kind of where it's like, yes, we're still using history as the backbone and the jumping point, but
it's your story.
It's your story. Yes, exactly.
Mm-hmm. I get it. I'm doing a bit of development work myself on a historical game, so I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, cool. Very cool. Yeah, because I didn't see the manuscript stops abruptly at the end of the kind of bestiary section. I was like, I was kind of hoping there'd be like an introductory adventure I could kind of skim through, but
not yet.
That's what I was wondering. It was a big question mark for me. Is there actually going to be something like that? So it's cool to hear that there will be.
Yes. Yeah. So I could give it to you now, but it's gonna look like the insane ramblings of a madman.
No, it was more a case of is there going to be one or not, or
yes.
Okay.
Absolutely 100% yes. So yes, the name of the initial adventure is Yono Savalle.
Yeah.
And then you know, again, intro adventure. So it's very much going to be. I'm trying to make it open-ended enough and also easy enough to where even if you're a brand new game master that's never GM'd a game before, you should be able to jump into this one relatively easily and run it.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. We're gonna jump into mechanics questions now.
Yeah.
And we're gonna start off with let's talk about the dice mechanic, because I can see that it's an iteration on what we've seen in Forbidden Lands, basically.
Yes.
So why don't you talk a little bit about, you know, why you chose the Forbidden Lands kind of dice mechanic, and, you know, the tweaks you've made to it. Specifically, I'm looking at the 3 damage tracks.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so The big thing that we did with that is why did I go the more Forbidden Lands route? Because I like Forbidden Lands. That's the short answer and the long answer on that. I wish I had a better answer for you on that. No one's asked me that before, but there you go. I like Forbidden Lands. So past that, the 3 damage tracks compared to like this kind of regular, it comes off of your stats that we see in most of the other Year Zero engine games, is actually a carryover from when we were developing the game before. So there was actually a system that was being designed from the ground up to run the role-playing game before we decided to switch to Year Zero engine. Mm-hmm. One of the things that a lot of the player bases really liked was the physical, mental, and social damage. Because of the fact that it really reflects that time period, right? Is the fact mental damage could be anything from stress to, in the cases of like, with a lot of your mental stats also deal with your sensory perception, where you're on the deck of a ship and a cannonball went ripping through the hull, knocked you on your butt, like you can't hear anything. So that not only did you take physical damage from like the wood kind of splintering into you and getting knocked down, there's also the mental damage side of it, where it's like, your ears are just ringing. You could taste pennies, like you could clearly tell like there's some internal bleeding somewhere in your head, so it helps stack a lot of that feeling together. And the social damage is exactly what it sounds like. You stick your foot in your mouth one too many times and it's like, okay, well now people in this party really don't like you. Or you take it to that part to where you're an absolute pariah within a town, and if you ever step foot in here again, they have a warrant out for your arrest and to be hung immediately, right? So like the damage tracks are there for a lot of different reasons. It's not as cut and dry as, oh, I took damage, I need to go heal, right? So like a social damage track, the only way you're healing is just by being a more positive influence and, rebuilding relationships within wherever you messed up, right? So that one is a little bit more nebulous compared to like the as we're used to kind of seeing in most role-playing games, the physical damage track, where it's like, I've taken 5 damage, therefore my arm is broken, I can't use my arm, right? Those are a lot more easy to follow compared to the social. But, again, being a game to where picking a fight isn't always the best idea, and, dealing more in the realm of realism, we also know, like the statement that stuck heavy in our mind as we were developing it and from the beginning was like, the old saying, the pen is mightier than the sword. And a lot of that comes from like governors and nobles and dignitaries that have way, way, way more effective ways of completely disabling you outside of like a duel or a gunfight, right? Like they can just make you out to be the world's biggest bastard, right? And like chase you out of a town and make it to where like it's impossible for you to do anything in a 10-mile radius, which back then was a long distance. So, as far as a lot of that goes, like, that's where social damage can also be a very, very nasty thing that can happen to you.
Yeah. Cool.
So in mental damage, a lot of that also comes in the same way. Like if your mental damage hits 0, like you're catatonic, right? Like you've taken enough concussive force to where, you pass out.
Yeah. Well,
or like your stress has hit that level.
So this is one of the questions I had for you, because it looked like as you take damage on those damage tracks, your stats don't have a penalty until you get into conditions. Is that right?
Yes.
So kind of, can you walk through? So I'm assuming that I don't actually know how big the damage tracks will be, because I did a fairly, it's a massive manuscript that I didn't have time to read in detail. So I didn't actually see how big those kind of damage tracks are to start off with. But I did notice that they don't, as you take the damage, it's not reflected immediately against your, like if you want to still keep using skills or whatever. So how does that tie in? Like, at what point does the damage track flip over into conditions, and how does that whole thing work? Right.
So I tried to make it to where you can be as detailed or as simplistic as possible with the way the rules worked, right? So you start suffering conditions as you go along. So like you start off as poised, which is, you can get punched a couple of times, you might take a couple of damage, but you're still like, you're still in the fight, right? Like you got a bloody nose. Whoop-de-doo. Like we've all scraped our knees and gotten back up and, kept playing on the playground, right? Like we're still poised, but as you start taking more and more damage, it goes from, poised to, it goes right down to like, at odds, forlorn. And so you start suffering, negatives to your dice pool the longer that you're in those areas. So in the way that it works, like using the typical year zero stats, is that anything that's using your strength or agility is going to come off of your physical, right? So like if you're at negative, if you're at forlorn, for example, which is -3, you're rolling 3 less attribute dice for anything strength or agility related, because at that point, like physically, you are exceedingly beaten up, right? You probably got some busted limbs. You're not doing hot. So it makes it harder for you to be able to perform physical functions. Where again, if like your mental stats are up there and you're just fine on that level, like okay, great, I might not physically be doing anything, but I could still be a tactical force for the rest of my crew, right? So that's where it comes in. It's the same thing with the mental track is tied into your wits, and then the social track is tied directly into your empathy, right? So in a lot of ways those similarities are still there. The difference of it is that we just worked it a little bit differently. Now again, with you having so many kind of dots within those tracks as you go along, one thing I will say on this is that the damage on like the gear qualities on the different things in the game are amplified in Under the Black Sail, right? So like don't try to take our guns, for example, and put them in Forbidden Lands. Like they're going to be way too powerful for that whole Forbidden Lands style of play. So as far as a lot of that goes, like I know that like our weapons and everything are amplified because of that. We had so many people that really liked the physical, mental, social tracks that we already made, that those incorporated over, and we just had to make them year zero related, right? And the way that we did that is by tying those into kind of what was already there, modifying it a little bit, and then also modifying the weapon stats that you would typically see in a year zero engine game to balance that out, right? So it's still lethal, definitely still lethal. Don't think that because I could take 9 in the physical that it's that you could clearly take more damage. No, you cannot. Like it's still a really bad thing.
Okay.
You could still be one shot killed, right? Like if we're really going to delve into the nitty gritty of it, a blunderbuss to the face will still kill you, no problem.
Okay. One of the next things I wanted to talk about was the use of playing cards and the Jonah status.
Yes.
Why don't you talk a little bit about the decision there to tie playing card mechanic? By the way, I love playing card mechanics in tabletop role-playing games, so I'm a big fan of. Very happy to see them. But why don't you talk about like how they're used in the game and especially this Jonah status.
So anytime that you roll a Bane, right? So for those of you that are familiar with Year Zero, which I'm assuming most of you listen to this podcast, whenever you roll a Bane, typically you take damage. And the way that we work is you actually draw a card from the deck, right? And this becomes what's called your Jonah status. So based upon how the ranking of the card from ace to king, ace being lowest, king being the highest, Joker is, oh my God, don't ever get that. The idea of it is that is something that the game master can use against you at any time in the future, right? So that Jonah status is basically, think of it as your bad luck piling up, right? So in the way that it's used in game, and this actually ties into another section that I have in the book called the Q section, which looks like, to kind of touch on that real quick, it looks like a monstrous section of charts. And I've had a lot of people say, oh my God, not a chart heavy game. Those charts are simply there to give you loads of examples, right? Like that's all they're there for. Past that, once you kind of get to know the system, if you never look at that section again, you're going to do just fine. The idea of it is that like the cards themselves are a severity rating. So the way that those are used is the game master is basically kind of, for lack of better terms, he's using this as a way to flip you the bird whenever you do something, right? So this could be something along the lines of you are coming up against a rival crew that's in the same port as you are, and you decide that you're going to kick in the door and shoot up the room, right? Like they've got manifest to a couple of ships that you're thinking like, that you like this rival crew was also thinking about robbing just like you were, and they've got the manifest or a copy of the manifest of what was on the ships from before, and you're like, we're going to take that, right? But we know that we got to basically go in and there murder everybody. So what'll end up happening is, let's say that you roll well enough, you kick in the door and boom, you start firing off guns. Bad things are happening everywhere, but you have a king, right? And so the game master goes, oh, Matt, you've got that king. I'm going to take that now. So yes, you successfully, because again, he's not doing anything to your roll. You successfully, shot the first assailant right in the face. and you have caused a lot of terror and panic in everyone else in the room. Because let's just say hypothetically you rolled really well, right? So like you kind of, boss of the scene. You're like, yeah, I did it. But he plays that king. In the chaos of that person crumpling over, they knock the lantern over on the table, which is now setting fire to all of the books and is now spread to the floor, which you also notice that there's powder kegs in this room, right? So now it's like, oh, that's awesome. I did something great, but because the game master decided it's time to pull Jonah's status, this just got way worse, right? So what it does is it creates a lot of drama, and like it creates that X factor to things that can happen within conflicts that you just can never foresee. Right? Like for anybody that's been in the military, X factor is one of the things that's talked about. You can plan for everything but the X factor, right? Because you can make the world's greatest plan, but there's always those weird things that can happen. So Jonah's status really allows the game master to create those like weird things that can happen.
Yeah.
Where even though, yes, you successfully kicked in the door, laid out the first guy, shock and awe, but again, he fell backwards, knocked the lantern over, and it's like, well, there's your Jonah status, right? It's your bad luck. You've been accruing enough bad luck that the game master's now finally going, it's my turn, and using it against you.
Yeah.
So that's ultimately how that works. And those tie into different things that we have in the game that are called, there's temporary and permanent positive and negative cues, right? And really what those are, if we're going to break that down in more of a simple game mechanic, is like it's pluses or minuses to your rolls. And then do they last for more than like this one roll, or do they, are they just this one roll? And then on top of that too, like it does tie into different things that can happen, right? But the idea of it is that it's a yes and no buts system that isn't just a pass fail mechanic, right?
Yeah.
Like there's other things that will happen based upon how well you roll, if the game master uses Jonah status. And really the whole idea of the Q system and Jonah status is that it gives more flavor to the game outside of did you pass, yes or no, thumbs up, thumbs down. Right. Yeah. That's really a lot of words to say that we wanted to give you an easy mechanical system that allowed cool things or bad things to happen. That makes sense. Outside of like, the game master being like, oh, I dropped the meteor on you from the heavens. Right. So we didn't want to have that, but we wanted there to be like ways to tie in good reasons as to why like your luck would change on you.
Okay. Yeah. Cool.
Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. Again, looking at the Year Zero engine, there's a game called Coriolis, which is a kind of Persian-themed sci-fi game, and it's got something called Darkness Points, which are kind of a similar sort of idea of this GM being able to do something to complicate the lives of the players without it feeling like arbitrary being a dick. And yeah, I'm a big fan as well. So that's cool to see for sure.
And that's one of the big things we wanted to touch on too, right? Is like bad things can happen. And like, one thing we've noticed in games over the years, because a lot of us have played other RPGs, again, going all the way back to like AD&D, first edition, second edition, things like that, right? And like we've seen things happen like this in games before. And when it's when there's not like a system behind it, it always makes it seem like, oh, the game master's just being a dick.
Yeah.
Right. And like it's one of the things that like we didn't want. We wanted the game master to be able to affect what happens around them, either positively or negatively. But we also didn't want the players to feel like, oh, well, that's just a dick move. Like we wanted it to be like they're like, oh no, my number was pulled.
Yeah.
Right. So it's totally up to the game master when they pull that Jonah status and use it against you. Yeah. But mechanically, there is a reason why it's there.
Yeah. I've had very, very long and deep conversations with people. Conversations, more like arguments. About them, because a lot, especially a lot of experienced GMs argue the point that they don't need them. If their table trusts them, then what's the point? But I really think that they're a great thing to have, and there are quite a few games that have them. And every game I've seen them in, whether that's the Edge of an Empire Star Wars game that has the kind of dark side points, or the Conan game which has Doom points, it's always I've always found them to be really good, and really good to use at the table as well, because you've got the players are buying into that narrative complication, and it just makes everything much more smooth. And even though the GM can always say, well, I can just do that on my own. Yeah, you can just do that. You can't just complicate their lives on your own. And yeah, you could just do that as part of the story, even if you're not tapping into this meta currency. It's still there as a way of, it's a great thing to have. So I'm really happy to see that too. I'm just kind of aware we've kind of just got over an hour, so I'm gonna ask you a couple of quick more questions, and then I think we kind of covered most of the stuff I've got on here anyway. A lot of the questions I've got are very, very nitty gritty. I think like
fire away. Let's see if we can knock them out quickly.
One thing I really like to see was again going to kind of the back section of the manuscript was the stats for NPCs, and one thing I very quickly kind of zeroed in on was that they didn't have full stats like characters do. Nope. They have, in terms of stats, basically, they've got like a melee stat, a shooting stat, a mentality stat, and some of them had like a defeat stat. What's the? By the way, I really love simplified NPC stats, so I'm happy to see that. But what's the thinking behind that? Like, because there wasn't a lot of description at the moment at the beginning of that section about like what those all mean and what they're there for.
So really, what it does is it allows you to make quick and dirty NPCs on the fly. That kind of gives you an idea of like. Because here's the thing, from a role-playing perspective, like if you just meet up with the Corsario, right? I'll just use that as an example, which is a kind of a Spanish nobleman turned sailor that's kind of their own pseudo-pirate, right? If you just meet up with the Corsario and you get along, well, then you just have a great conversation with the Corsario, right? It's not until complications happen that you really need to worry about stats on NPCs, right? So that's kind of where a lot of that comes in, so like, in the case of the Corsario, they're really good at sword combat because, well, they're nobles and we're trained in special, like schools like Destreza and things of that nature, where it's like, oh yeah, like you know how to use a cutlass, that's cute. Watch what I can do. So they, where it comes down to stuff like that, right? Where it's like that's where the complications come in. I didn't want to give them these overbearing stats where there's a lot to keep track of. It's just how good are they at fighting? How good are they at shooting? And like, where's their kind of like general mentality at, as well as like their resolve, right? So like in the case, like in the case of Corsario, like they've actually got a pretty high mentality stat because again, they're nobles. Like they went to school, they can read, right? Where it's like you're talking like your average sea dog. He's like, I don't know what that sign says, and like I'm being paid peanuts. I don't even wear shoes. You know what? I'm good. I don't need to fight anymore, right? So like. The whole concept was to give you a quick and dirty way that still created threats without needing like massive stat blocks to get the idea of what these people could do. So I basically list their general equipment, kind of like their support equipment or special case equipment, and like some generic ideas of what they would have for skills, right? And then I kind of broke it down into like, this is what an inexperienced one would look like, a trained one, and a veteran. Right. So, and that's pretty much how it broke down. So like, if you wanted to be like, oh, well, this, I've got a whole bunch of inexperienced sea dogs, like they're all brand new to this English crew, but there's this veteran that's leading them. Now you have the stats for both and they work well in sync with one another. And it doesn't take you, 5 minutes in between to figure out which one's which. You just kind of know. And one of the other things that, we specifically did not do, and this was something we went back and forth about quite a bit. You will notice specifically there is absolutely no stats related to any of the legendary commanders that are in there.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
The primary reason we did that is because of the fact that we are dealing with history, and we're dealing with the fact that we don't know what these people were really like. We're going off of what were said in books and accounts and manuscripts and things of that nature. So it's entirely up to you as to how you want to create these legendary characters. So, we could use Henry Morgan as the example on this, right? He formed the Brethren of the Coast. We know that he was trained by he was trained in the English Navy. He's actually, he's an expert sailor that beached a bunch of boats because he was really bad at navigating. But the point of it is that he actually knew how to lead crews. On top of that, he was really well spoken. Like the whole idea of the Brethren of the Coast is he created essentially like a frat house of sailors, and he created like a fraternity of dude bros, like new world dude bros that were like, hey, let's go drink, party, have fun, and like rob some people along the way. Hey, right? And that's kind of what he did. So it's entirely up to you about like, how do you want to lean into your version of Henry Morgan? Was he much more of the English sailor that was really good at leading people, just happened to really suck at being a navigator? Or was he like more of that dude bro frat guy? It's kind of like, as you're used to seeing on like the Henry Morgan Spice Rum where he's standing on the barrel of rum. Like, is he more that guy, or is he more, the
like a leader,
the brilliant tactician? right? So, and that really allows you to create the stats, and we encourage you for them to go through and make like full on character stats, give them skills, do all of those things, give them talents as you see fit. But we did not want to do that for you, because otherwise what we found is that they become almost kind of like a killable monster stat block within games, where people are now looking at it going, oh, I know the stats for, Francois Lolonais. I'm going to go kill him, right? Like, I know that my character is now powerful enough to go kill Francois Lolonais, right? Because we've seen this in a lot of other, fantasy games, not to call out D&D directly, but we've all done this with the metagaming, right? Like, we know that when we hit a certain level, like, we can walk through goblins, we can walk through orcs, right? So, we didn't want to make legendary commanders and characters within the game just like a stat block of things you can kill.
Yeah. Okay.
Hopefully that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, for sure, absolutely. Yeah, I'm actually working on a game. I'm not really allowed to talk about too much depth, but there's a similar idea of the kind of big baddies in it are not getting any stats for very similar reasons. But yeah, it's a cool thing to see. And again, I'm a big fan of seeing simplified NPC stats anyway. So yeah, really cool. I'm just kind of looking through and just want to see if there's anything we haven't really touched on before we kind of wrap things up a bit. I think one of the things that a lot of people ask about generally when they're looking at new games that are coming out with the Year Zero engine are things like the push mechanic. I could quickly just say the push mechanic is Forbidden Lands, where you can push a roll, but if any of the gear or the base dice come up with ones, then it doesn't damage the attribute. It goes towards the relevant damage track, right? But then meta currencies is the other question a lot of people ask about. And I've noticed that there are sort of three in this. We've got fortune points, we've got something called power points, and then we've got the playing cards themselves kind of act as a meta currency as well. So we've talked about the playing cards already. Can you quickly just kind of run through how fortune and power points work?
Yeah, so power points are specifically for strongholds, right? So that's basically like just the power level of the stronghold, right? So what it does is it gives it's a calculated number that allows you to say like, okay, the power of the stronghold is this, right? So what it allows the game master to do on the fly, if they don't know everything historical about the game, like, oh, this fort is about this bit, like Fort Matanzas had this many guns. Like, it's kind of like, okay, my sloop has a power rating of 47, Fort Matanzas has a power rating of 52, right? Where it's basically on the fly, it allows the game master to go, you know what? Like, after doing some research about Fort Matanzas, and again, I'm using some real world history here, not that this ever happened, but like a sloop attacks Fort Matanzas, it gives the game master enough to say, you know what? After doing enough research and getting enough intel, you feel you got a pretty good shot if you try to attack it via ship. It's got some heavy guns, so it's got that on you, but if you could hit it quickly and early, you got a good chance of taking it out compared to like some monstrous fortress, where it's like rolling up in a single sloop. You're like, no, you're dead. Don't do this. Right. So what it does, it kind of gives like just as a quick power scale, just to show for an easy reference, the difference between the forces that are about to battle. Right. That's really all it's there for. It's a number rating to kind of help the game master help with that. Fortune points, on the other hand, are a holdover from Blood and Plunder, which is a stat that's used in the game that basically is like you get 3 of them to start, and they're very, very hard to get once you start spending them, right? So it's not like you just replenish them every game, but it allows you to basically do an additional push on the roll. So if you pushed and still didn't get what you wanted, you can actually blow a fortune point and push again and take the second result. It allows you to re-roll failed dice within a roll. It also allows you to completely negate like some negative cues. So for example, let's say you were in a fight and someone swung a halberd at you and like would have cut your arm off, right? You can actually blow a fortune point where it's like you still take the damage. It crushed your arm. You didn't lose your arm, so you're not permanently out of arm, but what it did do is it destroyed your armor and like your sword's gone. Like he hit you so hard, you no longer have a weapon. Right. So it's kind of that same thing where it's like, or maybe the cannon goes off on the ship. You can blow that fortune point to say, I'm not really dead. You got blown off the ship. You're floating in the water, ended up on like, a couple busted pieces of hull, still afloat in the water, but you're just not dead, but you are definitely unconscious, right? You're left for dead, but you're not dead. So, you know, that's ultimately kind of where the fortune points come in. They're very, very, very hard to get back once you start spending them. So everybody starts with 3, and it's kind of a temptation to see how quickly people want to blow through it, right? Because the other side of it is you know, part of history too. There's a lot of people that when they became pirates, you notice that a lot of pirates, you hear about them at historical level, they had these big lives, but they were short-lived. It's kind of that same thing, like, you know, fortune favors the bold. Yeah, go ahead and be as bold as you want. It's eventually going to catch up to you.
Yeah.
So fortune points allow for you to kind of fudge your rolls, but know that they're also very, very, very hard to get.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, and a get out of jail free card, sort of like Wolfram's fate points, kind of. Yeah.
Yeah, kind of fate points, kind of get out of jail free cards, things like that you know, just allow you to have better chances. It's just know that, you know, fortune points, again, they don't replenish every game.
Cool.
Right, you have to earn fortune points back.
Yep. All right. So we've talked. There was a bit I wanted to talk about with the setting as well, but we've really covered that off at the beginning when you're giving the kind of the pitch for it. So the kind of the specific points I wanted to touch on, we've already talked about. So we're basically through my my questions. I guess the only big one left is when.
So we are shooting for, the best I can say is December, January, February.
Okay.
A lot of that right now, just from like the strictly business standpoint, which is never the fun stuff to talk about, but it's a matter of getting the editing done, because we do have a small team, and then it's also a matter of just like manufacturing and getting things set up on that level, right? Like I could of course just release a PDF the moment it's done, but people also still want their hardbound books, and we're talking about making this box set. So before like we're able to announce the Kickstarter or anything else, there's a lot of things like that in the background that we have to get lined up, get quotes on that, how much it's going to cost, how long will it take, you know, with freight charges kind of being all wonky right now, like what's that going to look like as far as that goes. So, you know, I guess there's a boring answer in there, which is kind of like once we get the boring background stuff done. But the idea is December, January, February, you should definitely see the announcement of it's going pre-order or Kickstarter or whatever that's going to look like.
Yeah. Cool. All right. So winter-ish.
Winter-ish.
If you're in the northern hemisphere, otherwise summer-ish.
Yeah. When it's still warm out, just not as warm as you're used to.
Cool. All right. That's basically it from me. So, yeah, is there anything else you want to kind of mention about the project or anything else, Tim?
Just stay tuned. I mean, I'm working my butt off in the background, getting a lot done. I do owe another playtest document out there to my playtest group. So for those of you that are listening on the playtest group, I haven't forgot about you. It's just unfortunately there's some stuff that when you're writing up the rules, they make sense to you, and then you read them to somebody else and they go, no, you need to completely reword that. So you got to go back and do that. So there's a lot of stuff that's still getting done on that level, but for the most part, what you actually have, Matt, is probably call it about 75 to 80% of the game done. Okay. Right. So you're missing the stronghold rules, like how they're used, mass battle rules, and just like some of the details on the equipment and things of that nature that you touched upon, such as the ships and how they're used and things like that. Okay. Once that's done, like we've pretty much got, outside of a couple corner cases and a little bit of cleanup in the game master section, it's done.
Okay, cool. Well, there's just one more question actually, just cropped into my head. You've talked about the collector's edition that you're thinking about doing. It's kind of, there's some obvious choices on, like some obvious things that would be included in there, like a custom deck of cards, for example. But what else are you kind of thinking about? Like, if you can talk about that, I'm sure there's probably not nailed down yet. But like, what are some of the other things you're thinking about putting into the collector's edition?
So the one thing we talked about quite a bit back and forth, and we've actually, had some, I don't want to call it internal arguments. That makes it sound like we bicker all the time. We don't. But it's, I really wanted to get across the point that, like, if we're going to do a collector's box, I want the full rule book to be in there. That's one thing that, like, I love to hear zero engine games. One thing that does irritate me from a consumer standpoint is, like, if I buy the Alien box set, the rule book I get in that Alien box set is not the full rule book. I have to go out and buy the $60 rule book.
I mean, the starter. Everything else. You mean the starter set?
Yeah, the starter set. So what we want to do is make a more complete, like for us, a starter set is the full rule book, dice, custom dice, maps, the intro adventure, the game master screen. Like it's basically, if we were to say, all right, you guys want to get into Under the Black Sail, boom, here you go. That's everything you need to get going, right? Just drop it all in a big box and hand it to you. So that's one of the things that we're really pushing on with that. So we're doing custom dice. So we'll have like some special symbols on there for, just showing like, the success and the failures. And then obviously a custom card deck, some custom maps. Like we're working with, he does a lot of fantasy pirate maps, and he also has done a lot of historical maps. He goes by Limithron online. He actually has his own Patreon. He's actually working on some maps for the game.
He's in the chat as well right now.
Yes. Yeah. So what's up, Luke? So yeah, he does absolutely amazing work. So like the moment him and I started talking, I'm like, dude, I want you to do maps for us. Like you have to. So he's actually doing a lot of that stuff for us and getting that done. We're talking with him right now about getting the character sheets and all that finalized. So we can have some really cool looking character sheets for the game as well. And then so the other thing that we talked about as well, because we actually did this in a board game that we did at Firelock Games, is we actually are looking at doing some overland maps on canvas. Okay. So you can actually have one big, beautiful blowout on canvas of a map, right? So it's more of it's a game prop on top of just being a map.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that we really wanted to touch upon.
Well, like a Caribbean map.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Wow.
Yeah, absolutely. Just print it on canvas, just like it would have been back then.
Yeah. I can see the meme of where you're like throwing money at the screen. Yeah. Okay.
So I've actually got. I'll tell you what. I'm gonna send you a teaser that I have, and you can post it. So
my wife's expecting a baby in December, so like money's gonna be tight probably right around when this Kickstarter is gonna be going live. I'm gonna have a very difficult conversation with her about
babe,
I need it. Cloth map of the Caribbean, come on.
Yeah, exactly. So that's all stuff that we really wanted to touch upon, right? It's like if we're going to give you a complete box set to get started, we really wanted to give you a premium experience.
Yeah.
So again, dice, cards, intro adventure, GM stream, the full book, maps, the canvas map. Like we wanted to be like, boom, here you go. This is what you need to get started.
Yeah, cool.
And of course, we're working on some other stuff in the background I can't quite talk about yet.
Yep. Okay. No, it's exciting. It's exciting. I'm looking forward to seeing the announcement. I guess it's not that long to go. We're already in October. So
no. So at this point, there's art. So I know we've only been able to show off a couple pieces of artwork. We actually have a lot of artwork that's being done right now. We're locking down some contracts with a couple other artists in order to get some extra artwork done.
Yeah. Okay.
For those of you that have never been in the industry before, it's great working with artists, but sometimes it's like herding cats. Yeah. So getting things done in a timely manner doesn't always happen the way that you want it to, especially when the artists that you're going for are also high in demand with other companies. So more artwork is being done. We'll have more to show on the eye candy side soon, but it is all being done 100%.
Yeah, cool. All right, cool. I think we're gonna kind of bring this to a close now. So
of course.
Once again, thanks very much, Tim, for coming to talk to me about your game. Very, very exciting. And thanks for everybody who made the time to come and chat. There's a little bit of chat just kind of cropping up here as well. I guess the one thing for me to do is my usual outro. If you haven't already, if you could hit the subscribe and the like buttons, that helps the channel to grow, of course. I guess this has been the second interview I've done in a kind of a week, I guess, which is a bit unusual. Normally it's like actual play content. We're going to be getting back to the actual play content, and there will be some other stuff happening over the next few weeks. But if you liked seeing if you like this interview and you'd like to see more interviews, let me know in the comments. And that's me.
Perfect.
So thanks so much, Tim.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a blast.
Yeah, cool. All right. Thanks everyone again for watching, and catch you next time. And now I've got awkward moment while I gotta find the correct farewell card. There we go.